We're going to demonstrate measuring the lower body, and you'd be using the lower body measurement form. And it always seems that everything is on the form that you'd need to know, but it's relating it to the body. And once again, using the mannequin isn't ideal, but it does save having a naked live model standing here. So I will mention the differences of what you would need to do with a live model. But in the meantime, here we are about to measure the lower limbs. This measurement form can be for shorts, full trousers, parts of a leg tube. You'd use the same form, and I'll just run right the way through the measuring, and then you can decide how much of this you would use in the situation required for covering the scar and treating an area specific to your patient. So starting logically on a figure such as this model has, there's a distinct waistline and slightly wider hips. To anchor a garment, it's nice to have a garment actually into a smaller measurement like the waistline, and we'll measure down as if we were measuring for this particular body. But of course there will be many difficulties with the lower limb in that you're dealing with gravity and you're dealing with friction. When someone moves a knee, it wants to drag. And if a person is injured just on the thigh and you're using a thigh tube, you do have the widest measurement at the top and very prone to wanting to drop off. So you do have to get very good measurements and precise, and you do have to get a good strong sticky silicone elastic to hold a leg tube up. A lower leg tube likewise is often on the wider point, and even socks and so forth. They usually work better if they're anchored on the smaller measurement, but sometimes you do have to anchor them further up. So those considerations need to be made, but in the meantime we'll start with measuring the waistline as our first stage, and I'm not able to get around her waistline, so just saying that you take the measurement, and once again, as we've said before, you'd be best marking where you've measured. Now sometimes you'd mark in the centre of the patient, but very often you can mark on the side at this stage, down the hip. So I would have marked my first measurement there, and then the second measurement would be, and you can see as I'm crouched here, when my thigh is up into my hip, that is the lowest a vest can go, and it also is a significant datum point for measuring the lower limb garments. It will be where the person bends. And so that particular point there, which almost looks like, and she's got a convenient mark like the panty line, would be a significant mark. So you would measure from the waist to that mark and divide it up into the sections required. Now in this case it looks like we have 3 sections there, and I have 14, so I'd probably put a 4 and then a 5 and 5 and actually mark those distances in first. I know sometimes I say make the circumferences and then measure the distances, but in this case you know where you're heading for, and you can divide the sections up more simply, deciding where you're going to measure, making your marks, and then measuring on those points. So in that case I'm coming across the pelvis there, and I'm going across the tummy here. Now this is often a bit tricky to get the tape measure straight, particularly in this case, because you've got the buttocks wanting to slide it in. So looking from the side like this, you can see when you've got it horizontal to the ground. And having made those measurements and written them in, we're now going down the separate individual leg. The first measurement going down the thigh will be to that hip joint that we've already marked, and that would be written in on the diagonal mark. And that particular mark there will then also be noted against the first horizontal measurement, which is as high into the groin as you can go. That first horizontal measurement you'd need to check that distance onto the paper, and then you can start going down as far as you want to go. Now, if you're doing just the thigh and wanting to stop above the knee, you make your mark, and then it's usually best to divide that mark up. At the moment I seem to have 32 centimetres. Once again, always measuring in centimetres. I divide that into the 4 sections that we have on the paper, would be 8, 8, 8, and I can happily start measuring each one circumferentially and trying to keep the tape measure horizontal, looking at it as we go from the side. It's a lot easier than when you're on the full torso to go down the leg and looking at each cross section and recording those measurements into the appropriate boxes, going down the thigh. Now at this point you'll notice I've marked it on the front of the thigh because that starts to be the straighter edge rather than the curve of a thigh or the curve of a calf. So we start to go down the front of the leg. If we are now going the whole length of the leg, we go right across the knee at the point where the knee would bend, and then once again below the knee, and after recording the circumferential measurements you'd be able to record the distance across the knee. That does change as someone bends, as I'm doing. You lose all the distance at the back and you gain some at the front, but our fabric does stretch in length. We don't ever remove any of the length in our calculations on a garment, but we do remove a component for the stretch, but the length is required for people to be able to flex and bend. And now you'd head down from just below the knee to the ankle. Might as well mark the ankle at its point there and record it, and then divide that section up again. And at this stage it goes again nicely into 4 because I've already got this part from the knee down to there, and once again it looks like I'm in 8s at this stage. Of course a man, it may be a greater distance, and a child it would depend how tall the child was, but if you can use those sections and just reduce the distances and record what distances you used, you would then quite simply use them as a grid and go down. It also is a good time, if there is a particular area of injury, to actually plot it and mark it, because that would show the pattern maker exactly what was happening. Whether it seems to suddenly swell up or dip in, it might be because of the injury. And now this is the important part when you get to the foot, is that if you've got an ankle which is measuring only, now notice I need the centimetres, if it's only measuring 22 centimetres, how is the heel going to go through? The heel, measured around the apex, is 31. And so that heel will have to go and could pass through about to there. That means a zip would need to go up to that level at least to open up the garment to let the heel through, and then you'd see what the patient requires as far as a zip's concerned. Very often a zip on the right hand lateral side if the patient's right-handed, or the inner leg of the left if the patient's right-handed is easier, and then they don't clash. Whether or not you want to avoid the injury and then put it on the inner side, you don't ever put the zip down the very front of the leg because it would then affect the ankle, the anterior of the ankle as the foot moves. It would always run down behind the malleoli. So the zips would run down that inner surface there and open the leg, the leg tube up to the height where the ankle can go through, which is why you need to record the size of the heel to go through that narrow ankle measurement, even if you're only stopping the garment here. So you may indicate that you're stopping the garment there, but that you've given the heel measurement in order to indicate the size of zip required. And if you're following through onto a sock, you do that as we've already indicated, turning the paper over, asking the patient to stand on the paper, and in fact you generally want them to be standing on the leg you're measuring with their weight on it. Now I have demonstrated on this leg because it has been placed in a better position for us to see on camera, but actually you'd want the patient to put their weight onto their foot, to actually have their foot down at the standing position rather than out, because the heel actually changes in size and you have to be able to consider the full size of the heel rather than the narrowed size when the foot is pointed. So you'd actually want them to stand on it as this leg is, and even measure on the leg they're standing on rather than just stretch it out to you.